everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is using LIHEAP and WAP to expand low-income solar access. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, and we're very excited to have guest speakers with us today from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Before we pass it over, I would like to go over some webinar logistics. If you'd like to minimize the webinar viewing panel, you can do so by clicking on the orange arrow that you see circled here. You can also click on the orange arrow to expand the webinar console. And one of the things that you might like to do during the webinar is to submit your questions and comments. We'll be saving 15 minutes following our presentation for a Q&A with the audience, and we will get to as many questions as we can. To make sure that we do get to your question, type it in when you think of it. It's best if you don't wait until the end. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and slides and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you via email within 48 hours. You can also find all of these materials on our website at cisa.org/webinars. This URL is where we post all of our upcoming and archived webinars, so it's a good one to know. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today's webinar, my colleague, Matt Ohloff.
Great, thanks so much, Zareen, and thanks everybody for joining the webinar today. As Zareen said, my name is Matt Ohloff, and I'm a project manager at CISA, or the Clean Energy States Alliance. CISA is a national nonprofit coalition of public agencies and organizations working together to advance clean energy. Next slide, please. CISA works with state leaders, federal agencies, industry representatives, and other stakeholders to develop clean energy programs and inclusive renewable energy markets. CISA members, mostly state agencies, include many of the most innovative, successful, and influential public funders of clean energy initiatives in the country. And you can see our member logos on your screen. Next slide, please. In today's webinar, panelists with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, will provide an overview of their new report titled Solar Pathways in Federal Energy Assistance Programs, expanding the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, or LIHEAP, and the Weatherization Assistance Program, or WAP. For a little context, low and moderate income households make up fewer than 20% of solar adopters, despite representing over 40% of US households. Federal assistance programs like WAP and LIHEAP can address this solar access gap through a variety of pathways for low-income households. So their report chronicles their efforts to document successful implementation pathways through analyzing LIHEAP and WAP annual plans, survey LIHEAP grant recipients and WAP grantees about obstacles to solar implementation, and conduct interviews and workshops with program administrators. Next slide, please. So our two panelists today are two of the authors of this report and supplemental materials. Juliana Williams co-leads the weatherization team for NREL based in Golden, Colorado. Her work focuses on improving policy design and program implementation for low-income and local clean energy programs. Jenna Harmon is a policy analysis researcher at NREL. She focuses on increasing low-income rooftop and community solar deployment, the state's collaborative initiative of the National Community Solar Partnership, and geothermal energy, as well as tracking federal and state policy in these areas. Before I hand it over to Jenna and Juliana, two logistical items. We'll be posting a poll right after I turn it over to them, asking about your experience with these energy assistance programs. So please fill out that poll. And then also their presentations will be followed by a Q&A session. So while they're giving their presentation, please feel free to post any questions you may have in the chat, and then we will field those questions during the Q&A portion. So without further ado, I will hand it off.
Great, thanks, Matt. So as folks are filling out the poll, I think maybe I need to fill out the poll too. So just to give a little bit of background, NREL has been involved in the solar space since its existence, and we have provided pretty in-depth support to the weatherization assistance program since about the ARA timeframe around 2009, 2010. And we've been expanding our engagement with the low-income home energy assistance program, LIHEAP, in the last few years. I'm not sure if I need to fill out the poll. Okay, great. So this is actually really helpful for us to understand the background. We're going to assume that folks have some familiarity with the programs. We'll give some high-level context of the programs, recognizing that a lot of the details can be found in some of the resources at the end. So if you have specific questions about program structure or how to get started, just know that we'll catch that at the end, and we have a bunch of resources for you to learn more. So if we can advance, I think we can skip the bio slide with Jenna and my picture. If we can go to the next one, yeah, after that. So our focus today is to give you an overview of the policy framework for solar in both of these programs in WAP and LIHEAP, as well as cover the pathways for solar implementation and provide you with resources to help with taking the next steps of using solar within these programs. I do want to note that our research covers solar photovoltaics, solar water heating, and community solar. Initially, we were just looking at solar PV and community solar, but at the request of the Department of Energy, we added in solar water heating since that is a fairly active component of the program. So if we can go to the next slide. Over the course of the last, I think, 2.5 years, we've been working on this project. It consisted of literature review to understand pilot programs, demonstrations, research that had been happening in the low-income energy assistance and solar space. We did a bunch of data collection with the WAP and LIHEAP networks, conducted interviews, developed case studies, hosted a stakeholder workshop to identify the existing barriers to implementation. And then we've developed the publication that Matt mentioned at the beginning, as well as a suite of implementation resources. So if we go to the next slide, and then we can go to the next one. I wanted to start with just an overview of WAP and LIHEAP, and I'm not going to read through all of the text on the page. I know it's a lot. It's there for reference. But I wanted to give you a sense of the scale and purpose for each program. So the Weatherization Assistance Program is run through the Department of Energy, and it's allocated to generally state-level grantees on a formula basis based on population. Typically, it's had an annual funding level of $300 to $350 million in the last few years, but the addition of the bipartisan infrastructure law added effectively an order of magnitude of dollars of $3.5 billion. This program provides free energy efficiency upgrades to income eligible households and is run all across the country. It's a 47-year-old program. LIHEAP has some similarities, but it's run out of the Department of Health and Human Services. It's a block grant, and so the recipients can be state-level entities, but there's also a large number of tribes as well who receive the funding. It has been a larger program than weatherization, again by about an order of magnitude, and the focus here is on helping families with their energy bills through a couple of different modes, and that includes weatherization. So we'll get into the interactions between these two programs a little bit later. But just wanted to set the ground floor so that folks know kind of what we're talking about. So if we go to the next slide, overarchingly, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 explicitly allowed renewable energy systems to be included within the Weatherization Assistance Program as measures that could be installed in client homes. Now, that's not a standard measure, and so that means that the grantees have to request approval from the Department of Energy to include it as a measure that can be funded. And so a few of the specifics, you know, the solar has to be considered cost effective. There is a limit on the amount of funding that can go to solar for each home. The overall limit for the program right now is about $8,500 per home. And so of that, this $4,169 is how much of that can be allocated to solar. Now, what that means is that that's not enough to install a typical solar array, a residential solar array that's in the 4 to 7 kilowatt range. So this means that that WAP often leverages other sources of funding. So that could be utility funds, that could be LIHEAP, it could be other allocations from state or local governments to kind of cover the balance of the cost of a system for installation, and that helps with the cost effectiveness. And I just wanted to note that because this is a federal program, federal expenditures on construction are generally subject to a National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, review, though solar within WAP with specific characteristics is eligible for a categorical exclusion. So that's the high level WAP framework. If you're interested in more details, there's a lot more in this weatherization program notice 23-6, as well as on the resources webpage that we'll share at the end. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so for LIHEAP, the solar framework, one of the things I think that's really important is that LIHEAP prohibits funds for construction, with one of the exceptions being low, cost-effective, effectively, residential weatherization measures and home repairs. So this means that while LIHEAP is not necessarily, going to go out and build large arrays, with the allocation to weatherization, solar can be included and installed on client homes. I also want to note, so that last bit applied to the physical panels being installed, but also LIHEAP, through HHS has issued guidance for LIHEAP that LIHEAP funds can be used for community solar subscription fees. And again, similar to weatherization, the grant recipients have to include that in their plan for approval from HHS, but it is allowed program-wide. They just have to specify that that is one of the intended uses of LIHEAP funds. So let's go to the next slide. Again, I'm not going to read all of this. This is for your background. The key takeaway, though, is that this first bullet, that grant recipients can allocate up to 15% of their funds to weatherization, or 25% if they receive a waiver from the Department of Health and Human Services. So the context for this is that oftentimes we see, because LIHEAP is a much larger program budget-wise than WAP historically has been, LIHEAP is actually often a larger source of weatherization funds than WAP itself. So the coordination between the two programs can be really important. They're often implemented by the same local organizations, though the state level agency managing WAP and LIHEAP may be different. So there's a need to coordinate. The other thing I want to note is that the LIHEAP funds have flexibility as to the rules that apply. So this can actually make them really complementary to WAP funds, where LIHEAP funds don't necessarily have to be subject to the same requirements around cost effectiveness or spending thresholds as the WAP funds. So I know that was a little bit of a whirlwind of policy framework. We can go to the next slide. Oh, I just wanted to mention, this is kind of the map of how much LIHEAP funding is allocated to weatherization purposes around the country. So you can see the majority of states are allocating that 15%, with some doing a little less. All but 2 allocate some portion to weatherization. So with that background, we can go to the next slide. And I will hand it over to Jenna. Jenna will talk through the various pathways that we've identified in our research and where they're being implemented to get you a sense of the level of activity. Jenna? Oh, Jenna, I think you're muted. We had you earlier.
Jenna, if you click on the audio section of your webinar console and click into the phone call and then click back to computer audio, sometimes it resets it.
Okay.
Oh, we got you,
we
Jenna.
got you.
There we go.
Perfect. Awesome. All right, so we can click into the next slide. So we identified 6 unique pathways that solar can be adopted into WAP and LIHEAP. And so we'll cover these and then we'll cover the activity of where they are. So next, the first pathway is that rooftop solar or solar water heaters are eligible weatherization measures in WAP through the process that Juliana mentioned before. Rooftop solar can be included. And again, DOE asked us to include solar water heaters. So now we've expanded our analysis beyond just rooftop and community solar to include other solar related measures. Next. The second pathway is that rooftop solar is an eligible weatherization measure in LIHEAP. So LIHEAP grant recipients may allocate up to 15% of their annual funds to weatherization. That money may be allocated for solar work specifically, as long as it's listed in the grant recipient's annual plan. In both pathways 1 and 2, we are seeing annual bill savings of upwards to $300 to $400 at households with rooftop solar arrays installed. Next, we have LIHEAP crisis funds being used to repair or replace existing solar. Crisis funds are LIHEAP allocations that are set aside by grant recipients to intervene in crisis situations, either bill payment assistance with a shutoff notice or a heating, cooling, or electric system repair or replacement. Rooftop solar panels are listed as eligible electric system repairs or replacements that crisis funds might be used for if a grant recipient includes it in their annual plan. And next is LIHEAP funds for community solar subscriptions. If a LIHEAP participant has a community solar subscription with any sort of monthly fee, LIHEAP funds may be used to cover the subscription fees, provided that the grant recipient includes that in their annual plan. Next, similar to pathway 4, LIHEAP funds used for client solar bills. If a LIHEAP participant has a rooftop solar system with a monthly bill, LIHEAP funds may be used to cover the bill if it's included in their annual plan. The last 3 pathways don't increase solar adoption or deployment, but they are beneficial to clients that have existing solar access. And then finally, pathway 6, the use of WAP or LIHEAP infrastructure for external solar programs. State and local LIHEAP and WAP administrators may choose to partner with an external community solar program to provide referrals or verify income eligibility. This pathway isn't included in the maps covering solar activity in WAP and LIHEAP because it's not normally represented in annual plans. But an example of this pathway usage is the NCSB Clean Energy Connector, which we will cover briefly after the maps. All of these pathways may be used together, but pathway 6 and pathway 4 are especially complementary because a LIHEAP administrator could connect a client with a community solar subscription, and then they could use the LIHEAP assistance funds to cover a certain amount of the subscription fees. So next slide, we have solar activity in WAP as of the program 2024 plans. States that have blue have rooftop solar approved as a measure. So Delaware, Minnesota, Michigan, Tennessee, Colorado, New Mexico, and New York all have that approval. States with green have a CERT grant that includes rooftop solar, which is New Hampshire, Ohio, Montana, Colorado, New Mexico, and New York.
And Jenna, I realized I forgot to mention CERT grants at the beginning.
Yes.
With the increase of funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, actually no, with the change in the law in 2021, Congress amended the WAP statutes so that when the overall budget for weatherization assistance program is above a certain level, the program can offer a certain number of competitive awards. And so one of those is the Sustainable Energy Resources for Consumers Award, or CERC grants. And these specifically can be used for renewable energy systems to be installed on client homes within the program, and they're not subject to the same cost effectiveness and spending threshold limits as typical WAP formula funds. So I forgot to mention that at the beginning, thought it would be useful to mention that now.
Yeah, so those are those green states. So states with yellow allow for solar water heaters to be approved as a measure, which is American Samoa, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Washington, and Wyoming. And then Oklahoma with red and yellow stripes has a CERC grant that includes solar water heaters. So next slide is the solar activity in LIHEAP as of this program year 2024. States with blue have a rooftop solar approved as a measure. So Colorado, Delaware, Minnesota, Puerto Rico, and Texas. States with yellow have solar water heaters or solar screens approved as a weatherization measure, which is Michigan, Nevada, Wyoming, and Texas. States with orange allow for crisis funds to be used for rooftop solar repairs or replacements, which is Northern Mariana Islands, Florida, South Carolina, Missouri, Washington, and Puerto Rico. States with green on them allow for community solar bills to be eligible LIHEAP payments, which is Minnesota, and then Nevada in purple allows for LIHEAP funds to be used to cover rooftop solar bills. So next slide is the clean energy connector that ties back with that 6 pathway as an example of where LIHEAP administrators can use program infrastructure to connect clients with community solar subscriptions. So the Clean Energy Connector is an online platform LIHEAP administrators can use to identify eligible and interested clients and provide referrals to community solar administrators through the connector, who can then reach out to clients. The connector requires community solar administrators to meet certain bill savings and consumer protection requirements to ensure the subscription benefits the clients. The connector is currently piloted in DC, Illinois, and New Mexico, and it's available to pilot subscription managers and local LIHEAP administrators in these states. After the pilot, the intention is to increase these efforts nationwide. And so next, Juliana is going to cover the resources created for solar and WAP and LIHEAP.
Great, thanks, Jenna. So we can go to the next slide. So in part due to our feedback from the network about how to implement these efforts, we've captured our findings in the various resources. So as Matt mentioned, we have our technical report, which identifies all the data, probably more quantitative data and analysis than most folks want to read through. But if you're interested in our findings, particularly around barriers for implementation, I do encourage folks to check that out. The next resources, all of these are available on the WAP website. We decided to house them on the WAP website rather than LIHEAP, just due to the weatherization overlap with LIHEAP. So we have a solar pathway decision guide, and this is intended to help walk folks through, of these pathways, what are the details, what are the considerations, the interactions with other programmatic efforts. So I'll give a demonstration of the screen once I walk through this high level overview. Next, we have an implementation toolkit, and this toolkit is really designed for folks who have chosen their pathway. Once you have that, how do you do it? And so we have templates and guidance and useful tools for folks looking to implement particularly rooftop solar as a measure within either WAP or LIHEAP. We have a series of solar case studies, and if we have time, we can touch on them, but we did some in-depth interviews with some of the early adopting states to understand how their program was set up and what some of the key lessons were from their experience. We have a set of frequently asked questions, which are really looking at, some of the edge cases of like, how does this apply to X? Or if I want to do this, what does this mean for monitoring? And we can get to that in a little bit. And then I just wanted to let folks know that we are still working on some additional resources that will be added to the page as they are completed. One of them is the savings to investment ratio calculator, and another is a solar energy burden calculator. So those will be upcoming, but I think we can go to the next slide. And actually here is where I'm going to take over sharing my screen if possible, so I can give a little demonstration of our resources on the web page. Okay. So I think it'll take a moment to load, but this is our the web page on the weatherization assistance page that is kind of your one-stop shop for all of these resources. So we provide some policy guidance, but then I'm going to just jump through and show you some of the resources that we have. We have this decision guide, and what it does is it walks through the various pathways for rooftop solar, community solar. Some of them are grouped together in a different organization than we presented today. But we give an overview and then some design considerations as to why you may or may not want to choose a program and how to do it. So this dropdown will allow you to navigate to see, what should you know about each of these pathways. And then it includes the water heating as well. We go into the frequently asked questions, and I think I wanted to just show a few of these questions just to give folks a sense of what content is here. So we have this one on, what other sources of funding can be used and how and who's doing that. We have links to some of the other resources for additional information here. Another example that I wanted to show was around what monitoring requirements might apply to solar, or what training and certifications are recommended for implementing solar in WAP. So this is a way to get a little bit more detail into how the program works. If you have particular uses that you want to have for WAP or LIHEAP funds for solar, I encourage you to check these out. As I mentioned, the solar implementation toolkit is designed for really like getting into the nuts and bolts. We have a bunch of resources, templates from other organizations or from within the programs. So this will help you go through template documents, lessons learned. We have a good chunk around procurement for solar services or equipment if rooftop solar is to be installed by a subcontractor. There's again lots of templates, and if you want to understand like how do I do X, this is the place to go, and we'll keep this up to date. So folks, as you all start engaging with solar through these programs, if there are additional resources that you think should be added, we absolutely want to hear from you. And then we have our case studies and technical report, as well as our data catalog. So there will be additional resources getting added to this. I know that the Department of Energy is working on some video series of doing the actual install of solar in homes. So once that's ready, we'll share those on this web page as well. But Zareen, I think we can stop sharing my screen and go back to our slides. Okay, and we can go to the next one. So Jenna and I just wanted to cover a little bit of the lessons learned from some of the early adopters. So to start, you know, Colorado was the first state to receive approval within WAP for using WAP funds for solar. They started as a pilot. WAP no longer requires pilot approval to move forward, but they were able to leverage utility funding to cover the balance of system costs that weatherization couldn't implement. And so as of now, you can see the amount that they have installed. At least through 2023, it was nearly 850 homes with more planned. So they've been pretty active and steady. One key thing is that they started with one particular local implementer, Energy Resources Colorado, and used that experience to refine their program approach so that now they are implementing solar statewide. And so in addition to that, they also received approval for use of LIHEAP funds for solar and for rooftop solar. And so that has been a smaller component of the total homes that have received solar in Colorado, but still a key part of the delivery. And so, you know, what the folks in Colorado have seen is they've kind of adjusted what sources of funding they use based on program need, program capacity, administrative burden. So they've been fairly adept at evolving their program over time to take advantage of the opportunities in front of them. The full case study on Colorado is available on that resources webpage. So if you have questions or want to find out more, definitely check out that case study. So we can go to the next slide and I'll hand it over to Jenna.
So our next slide is about our case study in Minnesota. Minnesota interacts with solar with 3 different pathways, with solar as an eligible weatherization measure in WAP, solar as an eligible measure in LIHEAP, and then community solar vendors are approved to be LIHEAP eligible vendors to allow for clients with community solar subscriptions to have their subscription fees covered through LIHEAP, which they're currently the only state that specifically allows for this designation to happen. Minnesota kind of started their pilot in 2017, and so far they've completed 29 projects with 22 more projects underway. They use a diverse source of funding, which can offer complementary features. So they use WAP funding, LIHEAP funding, utility, and state funding to allow for flexibility in amounts, cost effectiveness thresholds, and applicable rules. Additionally, Minnesota focuses on strategic partnerships that are crucial in developing and adapting program design. Minnesota works with Xcel Energy to provide upfront incentives and production-based incentives, as well as local service providers to administer WAP and identify solar eligible homes, and local solar installers to provide competitive pricing and install solar photovoltaic systems. Additionally, Minnesota is unique in which they have solar liaison employees, so they have staff specifically dedicated to solar and WAP to allow kind of like a more cohesive program and just have one point of contact for just the solar part of the program.
And one thing I do want to note, although Minnesota started the planning process for their pilot, it didn't actually go live until I think 2021, though we can confirm by checking the case study. And one of the things I want to note is that the process for getting a new program started requires a fair amount of time. Now, of course, I think Minnesota's was complicated a little bit by the pandemic, but you know, if there's staff turnover or leadership change at the organization, or change in availability of complementary funding sources, that could affect the ability of a WAP or LIHEAP entity to implement a new solar program. So, you know, one of the things we found is that it's really important to have really strong leadership commitment to seeing a program through, because while both WAP and while both DOE and HHS have been trying to streamline the process, there still are a lot of details that need to be worked out, partners to bring on board, and so the process is not fast, but it I think is likely to be faster than what we saw for Colorado and Minnesota, who kind of paved the way early on. So I think we can go to the next slide. We did want to touch on Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico had a unique experience with WAP where they actually received approval to do a solar plus storage pilot in response to the devastation left by Hurricane Maria. And so this was they used both weatherization assistance program funds as well as a portion of their state energy program funds to run this pilot. And so they ultimately were able to install solar plus battery storage on 6 units in 2022. Since then, they have kind of taken the time to reassess how they want to engage with solar in their programs. What is the best approach that makes sense? Is solar plus storage the approach they want to take going forward, or do they want to look at some of the other pathways? But this was a bit of a unique situation with the hurricane recovery. So it may not necessarily be fully applicable to all states and all situations, but it does show the flexibility and the willingness of federal programs to work with states to design programs that meet their needs. And then we can go to the next one. Jenna?
So finally, we just wanted to briefly touch on our case study in Washington, D.C., which uses LIHEAP infrastructure for external solar programs. In addition to being a pilot participant of the Clean Energy Connector, DC has a Solar for All program that works to engage low-income households with community solar subscriptions. DC's Department of Energy and Environment manages their WAP, LIHEAP, and Solar for All program, so it's easier for them to collaborate since all of their programs are housed in the same department. This program is aiming to reduce electricity bills of 100,000 low-income households by at least 50% by 2032, and as of 2024, they've enrolled 10,000 participants, of which 70% came from LIHEAP referrals. So DC has been very successful in being able to engage LIHEAP administrators and LIHEAP participants in community solar subscriptions.
Okay, so we can go to the next slide, and we'll just leave this one up for a little while. So this has the link to the resources webpage, as well as the QR code that will take you to that same link. So if you want to open that right now, feel free. Otherwise, you know, these slides and resources will be available after the webinar is over. So I think with that, we can move into the question and answer period. Thanks, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's one person that wrote, I'm in a state, Pennsylvania, that does not have the LIHEAP grant, including the solar option. How do we get our state grantee to modify its grant or grant application to include the solar option?
Yeah, so there are some specifics on the process on the webpage, but especially if you go to the FAQ section, there will be one of the questions specifically looks at the process, but it is fairly straightforward. The Department of Health and Human Services has been pretty receptive to proposals from their grant recipients for the use of LIHEAP funds for solar. So really the process is to work with the state level agency that receives LIHEAP funds. There are a few kind of check boxes within the LIHEAP plan that could be checked to allow solar rooftop crisis funds to be included, along with like a brief description of what that would look like. So really the trick is just to meet with your state level agency, talk with them about the plans for that. One of the things that probably would be important is if you can bring a local program implementer that is excited to do the actual implementation into those conversations, so that you know that there's an entity that is willing to work with them to kind of be the first mover of implementing solar within the program, and what that would look like. Really the focus there is just work with your state level grantee, show them that there's interest and demand, and make that request. And then it's a very simple process to update the annual plan with LIHEAP. And I'm not recalling off the top of my head exactly when the LIHEAP plans are submitted, what time of the year. Jenna, if you know that, that might be helpful, but it is on an annual basis. So if you start the conversations with your state level grantee or grant recipient, if it's out of cycle of the plan process, you might need to wait a year, but that would give time for program development, bringing the partners on board, that kind of thing. And I will note that because LIHEAP has more flexibility in the program rules, what we're seeing oftentimes is that the LIHEAP dollars could cover the entire cost of a rooftop solar installation, whereas WAP dollars can only cover a portion. Do we have other questions?
We do, sure. Let me turn my camera on so you can see me. Hi, Matt. Looks like he's working on joining, but for now, you've got me. So someone wrote in, is it still true that the solar support is only allowed for purchases of solar but not lease programs?
So this is actually where I believe it was our fourth pathway that Jenna talked about is really important. So within LIHEAP, there's the pathway that allows solar bills to be included in the total energy costs that are used to determine the LIHEAP benefit amount. So if a client has a solar lease, then that can be wrapped into the benefit amount calculation. So it's not a one-for-one direct payment of the bill, but it does get built into the amount calculation. And so right now, that approach is only being used in Nevada, I think in part because of the prevalence of solar lease options in that state. But it is a model that can be implemented in other places.
Thank you. All right, someone has written in to ask, can you say more about the requirements to meet the categorical exclusion for NEPA? That sounds like it could be a significant hurdle depending on the specificity of the requirements.
Yeah, and I will be a little bit vague in that I know that there is some work to update the categorical exclusion language that hasn't been made formal yet, but generally what we're seeing is that within WAP, the categorical exclusion for solar requires the rooftop solar to be attached to the dwelling unit. So this doesn't apply to ground mounted solar, for example. And it applies to systems up to 60 kilowatts. And the intent for that was to enable solar to be installed as well on multifamily units. But there's a little bit more detail forthcoming, but we're in the middle of a bit of an update process. So I don't want to give incorrect information that will change or preview the information that is yet to be finalized. But we will, once we have that finalized information, we will be updating the FAQs to include that.
Okay, thanks. All right, someone wrote in wondering if there are any recommendations for a state where the LIHEAP administrator, social services, has not prioritized solar in its past funding allocation plans. Any recommendations for how to get buy-in?
Yeah, I think we mentioned this very briefly at the beginning, but Jenna mentioned that what we're seeing from some of the early adopter states, particularly we have data from Colorado and Minnesota, is that the rooftop solar installations are generating upwards of $300 to $400 of savings per year for these residents. And so depending on how each state structures their LIHEAP benefit, that could be a roughly equivalent amount to the benefit a typical LIHEAP recipient would be receiving. But it only requires the investment once and then generates savings year after year after year. So, looking at the dollar savings amount and the long-term impacts of that can be a compelling argument for allocating funds for this purpose. I think the other piece is just to understand, what are the barriers, what are their objections, so that you can craft your approach to address those concerns. I will say, one of the big concerns around community solar and to some extent rooftop solar has been the consumer protections. There have been around the country some less scrupulous vendors who have tried to pitch their services to low-income clients, maybe without full visibility of what the agreement is going to look like, how much savings the clients would receive. And this is where doing really good vetting of vendors through the procurement process, if you're going to do rooftop solar, is important, or through the community solar to identify qualified vendors. And the Clean Energy Connector, I really do want to highlight this. One of the key roles of the Clean Energy Connector, which is a partnership between DOE and HHS, is to provide this platform to connect LIHEAP clients and potentially maybe WAP clients in the future, we'll see, with good community solar vendors. And so that means that the vendors have to meet certain eligibility requirements on guaranteed savings and consumer protection provisions, so that the folks running the programs know that their clients are going to be in good hands when they're working with outside vendors.
Great. And I'm checking in to see if we have Matt here. It looks like he's working on logging in. All right, Matt, speak up if you are able to get connected. Juliana and Jenna, we've gotten a lot of consumer protection related questions. One person wants to know, relatedly, are there any states that have warranties available for solar installations? And if so, if you could go into detail about that.
Yeah, and Jenna, I'll say I've kind of been jumping in on most of these, but if there's anything you want to add, feel free. I will say in the procurement process, so what we're seeing in Minnesota is that the state managed the procurement process for solar installers on behalf of their local subgrantees, and there are they included in their requirements that the solar installers provide certain warranties. So there's nothing, there's no nationwide requirement or necessarily best practice, but that is something that is really valuable to build into procurement. I will also say that most equipment manufacturers offer equipment warranties, and some may also offer performance warranties. So the equipment warranty is like if the equipment breaks within a certain amount of time, that facilitates the replacement of the equipment. The terms may vary, but it generally should be at no cost. And then as far as performance warranties, that's, is the solar system, the solar array, generating the electricity that it was expected to. And this may vary by vendor, but that is, again, something that can be built into the procurement process. We are currently working on one of the FAQs that will be added soon. It will be on warranties. What we are seeing is that the development of technology in the solar sector has led to, initially or a few years ago, solar inverters were only seeing about a 10-year lifetime. We're seeing that increase now to around the 20 or higher timeframe. and that would be through the manufacturer. So we're working to get some of that information pulled together for this audience, because we know that the warranties, the question of like, what happens if something breaks? Do these clients have to pay for it out of their own pocket? Is a big concern. So that's an area of continued research for us.
We did have a couple of questions coming in about whether WAP and LIHEAP can cover roof repairs or anything related to that for homeowners.
Yes is the answer, but it may be limited. So whether the WAP allows for incidental repair measures, and so that could look like if there's like a hole in the roof that needs to be fixed in order for the weatherization measures to go forward. There are provisions that allow funds to be used for that type of measure. What it doesn't include is like major roof work. So like if there's a need for roof structural improvements or full replacement, that would not be covered by WAP. And one of the things that we heard from the folks in Colorado was that due to roof condition, shading, and other like site-specific characteristics, only about 10% of eligible clients were able to receive rooftop solar. And so, you know, depending on the roof quality or building type, interconnection with the utility, those kinds of factors, that's part of the reason why we wanted to also include all this information about community solar, because we know it's not going to be a viable option. Rooftop solar is not a viable option for all households, and so community solar, while also not uniformly available across the country, is another option to explore. And I will say also, one of the things that was a bit of a surprise to us was how much activity we are seeing just since we started this project around solar water heaters and solar screens through LIHEAP. So that has actually really taken off in the last couple of years. And then as far as LIHEAP goes, again, the provisions are much more flexible. And so if the LIHEAP administrator or LIHEAP grant recipient wants to include more expanded provisions for roof repairs, they can, pending approval from HHS. The other piece I want to note is that WAP has a subset of funds called weatherization readiness funds that can be used for the types of activities that could prepare a home to receive weatherization services as a whole, not necessarily solar specific, but if a broader roof repair is required to receive service, that could be an option for weatherization readiness funds. That said, I think only 50 million have been issued nationwide, which if it was evenly allocated, which it's still by population, that would be roughly a little less than 1 million per state, which can be which is not a lot. And so one of the things we want to encourage folks who work with other programs, so whether that's you know, local allocations, philanthropy, other federal programs that could use funds for weatherization readiness purposes. If you don't work in WAP or LIHEAP, a really effective way to increase the impact is to allocate funds for weatherization readiness purposes.
Great. Okay, we've got 3 minutes left. I'm going to let you choose your own adventure here. We've been getting a lot of questions about how LIHEAP and WAP programs could interact with new IRA funding. And we've also been getting a lot of questions about housing types, single-family homes, manufactured homes, multifamily. So Jenna and Juliana, is there one of those topics that you think is more urgent and has been less covered in your presentation that you'd like to answer as your last question?
I think I want to touch on a little bit of the IRA stuff, but Jenna, I think if you want to touch on any of the housing type, maybe we could split and cover both in a little bit. I will say, as far as IRA or other sources of funding, a lot of the rebates coming out through the IRA have a provision that limits the ability to leverage other sources of federal funding. So some of those rebates may be difficult to coordinate with WAP or LIHEAP, given that provision. That said, WAP and LIHEAP cover certain measures, and if there are measures that can't be included, that can be covered by rebates, there may be an opportunity to partner, or for homes that are unable to, or households that are unable to receive weatherization, those programs may be complementary, but we're largely seeing them as like either or rather than both and. But I will also say that the EPA is issuing a lot of financing and funding for through the Solar for All program, which encourages coordination with weatherization programs. So I think it's important that folks engage with their state level or the state level recipient of the EPA Solar for All funding to coordinate how these programs can support each other. And Jenna, if there's anything you wanted to add on housing type.
Yeah, so most of what we've discussed so far is really just relevant towards single family homes. Multifamily is and manufactured homes are both an emerging area of interest with solar, and so there's going to be some kind of additional research and guidance and things like that moving forward. New Mexico's CERC grant is focusing on multifamily housing and includes solar, and so that's kind of one place that's going to have some more information about that in the future. And just kind of a general sense, we've seen a huge growth in states adopting solar over the last couple of years of looking at state plans and looking at the solar activity. So it's kind of emerging in general, and all of the guidance is kind of started off focusing on single family homes and is starting to move into manufactured and multifamily housing as the single family housing guidance kind of gets more solidified.
Yeah, and I'll also add Colorado has also received a competitive award. I think it's their Enhancement and Innovation Award that includes manufactured housing in the mix, and I believe for solar. I'd have to check on that. As far as multifamily goes, I think we're seeing a really strong divergence between small multifamily, which is kind of generally considered 1 to 4 or 2 to 4 units, versus large multifamily, and that's largely due to roof space and having the roof space to accommodate a system that can meaningfully contribute to the energy bills for all the clients. But there's challenges around virtual net metering and that kind of thing that we're still trying to work on with our federal partners. So I know we're a minute past time. We're happy to stay a handful of minutes more if there's any other questions, but Samantha, maybe we'll check in with you.
Sure, there are tons of other questions. Questions about microgrids, electrical upgrades, all kinds of things, but we're definitely not going to get to all of them. How about in our last few minutes, I ask you both just what are your top level takeaways? If people take one thing away from this webinar, what do you want them to hear?
I think for me, my top level takeaway is that there's a lot of opportunity here to design a program that meets your needs. So think about who you want to serve, how that relates to the local policy environment and maturity of your solar market, what your stakeholders want to see, because chances are there's an approach that could work, and I think what we've seen is a real willingness from the federal partners to facilitate solar through their programs. So if you have an idea or you want to pursue it, work with your state level entity, work with the federal project officers or points of contact, because there's a lot of opportunity here. Jenna, what's your key takeaway?
Yeah, I would agree with that there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of opportunity specifically for collaborations with funding sources. So there's a lot of other funding out there besides just LIHEAP and WAP funding that might have different restrictions on kind of the program abilities. And so being able to collaborate with different sources of funding has been really helpful to states that have already added solar into their programs. And just there's a lot of different ways that solar can interact with LIHEAP and WAP, and there's a lot of room for innovation and opportunity moving forward.
And
Great. Well,
Samantha,
thank
I will
you.
say, if there are additional questions that folks would like responses to, if you can send those questions our way, we can see about crafting responses and sending them over to you.
Sure thing. Yeah, we got about almost 50 questions. We have not covered all of them, so I will send those along to both of you, and I'm sure people would definitely appreciate a follow-up. So we'll pass those along. All right, well, sorry to those whose questions we didn't get to. Thank you so much. Jenna, Juliana, this was so interesting and useful. Thanks to everybody who attended. We've got a bunch more webinars coming up later in the month. You can see those on your screen, and you can read more and register at cesa.org/webinars. So thank you again, everyone. We'll send slides and a recording to you today or tomorrow. We'll get that out to you via email, and we'll post it on our website. So thank you again, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.